The first violin hit the air like a spark, and every head in the Paris station snapped toward the sound. People thought it was just a street performer, until a second violin rose behind them. And then the bells began. Gare du Nord was its usual chaotic self, suitcases rolling like thunder, announcements echoing from the ceiling, tourists arguing with maps they couldn't read. No one expected anything unusual. No one expected music to rewrite the atmosphere of the entire station. And definitely no one expected 100 musicians waiting silently among the crowds, each holding their breath, each hiding their instruments as if they were carrying the world's most beautiful secret. But that was the plan. That was always the plan. It started with a single violinist at the center of the main hall. She looked ordinary. Black coat, red scarf, hair tucked behind her ear. No microphone. No fancy setup. Just a violin that had traveled across more countries than most people in the station. She lifted her bow slowly, eyes closed, tuning herself to the heartbeat of the crowd. And then, with a soft inhale, she began the first whispering notes of Carol of the Bells. They came out soft, precise, almost too delicate for a station so loud. Yet somehow, impossibly, people heard her. A ripple went through the crowd as if someone had stepped on the atmosphere itself. Heads turned. A man holding a baguette froze mid-bite. A child tugging her mother's coat stopped pulling. Even the pigeons on the rafters seemed to pause. Then the second violin answered. It came from behind the crowd, rich and sharp, echoing the theme like a twin waking from sleep. A few people spun around, confused. Others lifted their phones but lowered them again, unsure if this was a performance or some surreal coincidence. The melody bounced between them, violin 1 and violin 2, playing the ancient, haunting rhythm that felt like winter snow cracking under boots. And then, the bells began. But they weren't real bells. They were hand chimes, hidden in the hands of 6 performers scattered across the station. One stood near the ticket machines, another by the bakery, 2 near the escalators, and 2 tucked behind pillars. Each raised their chime in perfect synchronization. Ding, 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 ding. Soft. Gentle. Precise. People gasped. Phones rose like an army of glowing rectangles. Still, no one realized what was coming. Not until the cellos joined. A deep vibration rolled through the station floor like distant thunder. 3 cellists emerged from the crowd, cases open, bows drawn. They sat right on the cold marble tiles, playing with such focus that it felt like they were channeling the sound of an approaching storm. Tourists gathered. Commuters stopped walking. A security guard radioed his partner. "I don't know what's happening, but it sounds amazing." Over. The violins grew louder. The bells chimed sharper. The cellos rumbled deeper. Then someone on platform 4 took a breath. A choir of voices, 20 strong, hidden among the arriving passengers, lifted their heads. They didn't start loud. They entered the music like a shadow slipping into the light, humming the iconic harmony, blending with the instruments until it felt like the entire station itself was singing. A woman dropped her coffee. A man whispered, "Mon Dieu." A little boy climbed his father's shoulders to see. The melody rose, layered and powerful, a holiday anthem reshaped into something cinematic and unstoppable. But the Flashmob was only at 20% intensity. The conductor, disguised in a simple gray coat, stepped out from behind the bakery. He raised a single hand. The musicians, spread across nearly the entire terminal, stood straighter, watching him like satellites orbiting a single sun. He dropped his hand, and the explosion of sound nearly lifted the roof. 40 violins, 10 violas, 15 cellos, a dozen chimes, 20 singers, and a brass section hidden behind the ticket gates that blasted in with perfect dramatic timing. The entire station shook under the weight of the music. People laughed, cried, screamed for their friends to start recording. Trains arrived and passengers stepped out into what looked like a scene from a movie. Hundreds of people circled around musicians who seemed to appear out of nowhere, filling the station with a sound so majestic it felt like Christmas itself had descended upon Paris. A little girl tried to hand the conductor a croissant. A tourist climbed onto his suitcase for a better view. A news crew outside heard the noise and rushed inside with cameras rolling. But the musicians weren't finished. They were just reaching the part that would change everything, the moment the choir was about to unleash the soaring vocal line that turns Carol of the Bells from beautiful into unforgettable. And then, the lights flickered. The lights didn't just flicker. They warned the crowd. Because what happened next made it feel like the entire city of Paris was holding its breath, waiting for the next note. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The music, the crowd, even the pigeons on the beams seemed suspended midair as the station's lights dimmed to half their glow. A wave of whispers rolled through the hall, uncertainty, confusion, a tiny spark of fear. But then, as if the city itself wanted the flash mob to continue, the lights surged back brighter than before. A single voice, clear, powerful, impossibly steady, cut through the stunned silence. "Hark how the bells!" The choir erupted. 20 singers, scattered strategically across platforms, escalators, and benches, stood tall and let their voices cascade through the station in a wall of pure harmony. Their timing was flawless, landing exactly on the downbeat the moment the lights returned. The effect was electric. People's jaws dropped, phones tilted upward, and someone in the back yelled, "C'est magnifique!" The violins soared higher, matching the choir with a shimmering, icy sharpness that made the air feel like winter crystal. The brass section behind the ticket gates blasted their entrance notes, big, cinematic, resonant enough to vibrate through coat sleeves. And that's when the drummers appeared. No one had seen them coming. Hidden strategically near the luggage lockers, 3 percussionists stepped forward, each with a marching snare strapped to their chest. They raised their sticks in a perfectly synchronized arc. Crack! 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 The rhythmic pulse hit like a heartbeat, waking up the entire station. The sound carved a path through the melody, sharp enough to slice through the massive hall and anchor the whole performance. People clapped instinctively. Kids covered their ears only to uncover them a second later, too amazed to look away. The conductor moved through the crowd like a ghost leading a parade. With every flick of his wrist, strings tightened, tempo quickened, voices expanded. He wasn't just conducting musicians, he was conducting the atmosphere, bending it into shape. Near the bakery, a group of tourists still holding half-eaten croissants began chanting the rhythm. A woman in a red beret teared up as she filmed, whispering to no one, This is magic." By now, hundreds of people had gathered, forming a ring around the main performers. But this flash mob had no main performers. The real magic was in realizing that the music was all around you, behind you, beside you, above you on the stairs. Wherever you turned, someone was playing. Then came the moment everyone would talk about later. The basses entered. 4 musicians carrying massive double basses strode through the automatic glass doors like marching titans. They played immediately, no tuning, no pause, no hesitation, bowing with such force that the ground almost trembled with each note. Their sound was deep, enormous, echoing like rolling thunder crossing the city. People screamed, not in fear, but in disbelief. "Where are they all coming from? Is this the whole Paris Orchestra? Bro, this is better than the Paris Orchestra." The melody reached a furious pace, violins slicing through the air, brass roaring, drums cracking, choir lifting everything like wings. Paris had turned into a cathedral of sound. And yet, the musicians still weren't done. Up on the balcony overlooking the main hall, 5 trumpeters lifted their instruments. No one noticed them until they played. Their notes shot downward like golden beams, slicing perfectly through the choral harmony and adding a triumphant brilliance that made people gasp loudly. Someone dropped their suitcase. Someone else dropped to one knee just to get a better angle for recording. A couple hugged tightly, overwhelmed by the emotion of the moment. But deep in the crowd, the station's security team was watching. Not angry. Not worried. Just stunned. The same guard who had radioed earlier stepped forward, eyes shining, whispering into the mic. "You need to get down here. Trust me, you won't believe this." The central crescendo approached, the moment when Carol of the Bells explodes into its most dramatic section. Every musician prepared, leaning forward, eyes locked on the conductor. He raised both arms. The room inhaled. And then, boom! A sudden blast of deeper percussion, bass drums from the upper platform, landed like the heartbeat of a giant. Two performers who had blended with the crowd for the past 10 minutes stepped forward and unleashed a cinematic drumline so powerful people felt it in their chest. The song rocketed into a new dimension. Strings moved faster. Choir voices soared higher. Brass burned brighter. Drums thundered harder. It was no longer just a flash mob. It was a phenomenon. A group of children near the arrival's gate began caroling along, their tiny voices mixing with the pros in a chaotic but adorable harmony. A couple danced on the tiles. Someone climbed onto a suitcase and yelled at the top of their lungs, "Vive la musique!" And just when the energy felt like it couldn't go any higher, the musicians suddenly stopped. Every instrument, every voice, every drum. Silence. But the conductor kept one hand raised. The crowd held its breath. Because everyone could feel it. Something massive was coming next. A twist no one in the station could predict. The silence didn't just hang. It charged the room like electricity. Everyone felt it. The next note would either break the station or make history. For a full second, Gare du Nord was the quietest place in Paris. 100 musicians frozen mid-pose. Hundreds of spectators frozen mid-breath. The conductor frozen mid-air, his hand raised like he was holding lightning between his fingers. And then, a whisper. Not a voice. Not an instrument. A humming. Soft. Gentle. Echoing from high above the station. People looked up. On the second-floor balcony, between the cafe and the souvenir shop, a small children's choir stepped into view. 20 kids dressed in winter coats, scarves, and Christmas hats, each holding a tiny candle-shaped LED light. They began to hum the opening line of Carol of the Bells with the innocence only children possess. Their harmony was fragile and pure, brushing across the vast hall like snowfall in slow motion. A woman in the crowd gasped. A man wiped his eyes. Someone whispered, "Mon Dieu, ils sont anges." The conductor lowered his hand, turned to the balcony, and offered them the softest bow, as if acknowledging royalty. The children responded with a bright, gentle crescendo, their voices building just enough to fill the hall without breaking the spell. It felt like time was folding over itself, Russian crowds turning into silent listeners, train announcements fading into the background, every heartbeat matching the rhythm of those small voices. Then, with perfect timing, the conductor spun back toward the main ensemble and made a subtle, swirling gesture. The strings re-entered, but not loudly. No, they slid back in like a whisper turning into a breath, bows trembling on the surface of the violins. Violists harmonized beneath them, adding warmth and depth. The cellos pulsed underneath, slow and steady, like a quiet heartbeat returning after a moment of awe. The adults in the crowd relaxed. Kids pulled out their phones. Even the security guards lowered their radios. The flash mob wasn't exploding this time. It was glowing. Then came the moment that shifted the entire emotional tone of the performance. A lone flutist stepped onto the escalator. She wasn't even facing the audience at first. She simply stepped on, lifting her flute while the escalator rose, carrying her upward through the air like a character in a fairy tale. She began to play a delicate counter-melody, airy, bright, dancing between the children's voices and the soft strings. The crowd sighed collectively, enchanted. But the magic didn't stop there. Behind her, as the escalator reached the top, 2 clarinet players stepped forward and joined her in harmony. The 3 instruments twirled around each other, weaving a sound that felt like tiny stars flickering in the station lights. The conductor's smile finally broke. He felt it. Everyone felt it. The performance had shifted from spectacular to emotional. Down on the main floor, the brass section softened, using mutes to turn their once powerful blasts into warm, velvety echoes. The chimes returned, each ding ringing like a snowflake hitting a window. The percussion softened their sticks, tapping gentle rhythms that blended with the heartbeat of the station. The children's choir descended from the balcony, slowly, carefully, each step glowing with their tiny LED candles. Their voices blended seamlessly with the instrumentalists waiting below. People moved aside instinctively, creating a pathway as if angels were walking among them. The kids reached the main group, spreading into a semicircle that turned the entire flash mob into one united shape. And then, the conductor raised both hands again. This time, the musicians understood. They were preparing for the rise. A soft tremble of violins. A delicate shimmer of flutes. A hum in the choir. The sound began to swell. Slow. Slow. Slower. Growing like dawn pushing against night. A woman cried openly. A man mouthed the lyrics as if praying. A teenager whispered to her friend, "This is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." Then the timpani players, who had remained hidden until now, rolled a deep, thunderous crescendo that rumbled through the station floor. The conductor stepped forward, coat swirling, arms spread wide. And the entire ensemble surged. Violins soared into the upper register, bows blurring. Brass unfurled in a warm, golden wave. Choirs, both adults and children, opened their voices fully for the first time, filling the air with a cathedral-like richness. The melody was no longer just carol of the bells. It was Paris becoming an instrument. A man near the entrance dropped to his knees, overwhelmed. Tourists hugged strangers. Dozens of phones streamed live to the world. But as the music reached its height, a sudden blast of cold air swept through the station. The glass doors at the entrance slid open. And in stepped a marching band. Full uniform. Full drumline. Full brass row. 100 more musicians. The crowd erupted into screams. And the conductor turned, eyes wide, a smile spreading as he lifted his arms once more. Everything was about to go beyond legendary. They didn't walk in. They stormed in. The moment the marching band appeared, everyone knew. This flash mob wasn't just big, it was rewriting the definition of massive. The automatic doors whooshed open as if bowing to royalty, and the marching band marched in with military precision, boots striking marble tiles in perfect unison, drums beating a pulse that struck directly into the chest of every onlooker. People screamed. People cheered. People forgot that trains existed, forgot they had places to go, forgot the world outside the station. Because 100 more musicians had arrived. With uniforms. With flags. With drums strapped to their chests like thunder cannons. And every single one of them was already playing. The drumline led the charge, 4 snares, 2 tenors, and a massive bass drum crew whose steps sent vibrations through the floor. Their rhythm locked instantly into the tempo of the orchestra, syncing in a way that felt impossibly rehearsed, impossibly tight, impossibly cinematic. Crack, crack, crack. Boom. 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 The conductor didn't flinch. He simply pivoted, extended one arm to the marching band, and gave a sharp nod. They were officially part of the symphony. A roar went up from the crowd. The brass section behind the snare line lifted their instruments and unleashed a triumphant melody. Trumpets, trombones, tubas, French horns, adding a bold, heroic flavor that transformed Carol of the Bells into something monumental. This wasn't music anymore. This was a soundstorm. The children's choir instinctively spread out, the glow from their tiny LED candles reflecting in their eyes as the wave of sound washed over them. The older choir members stood behind them, voices ready to soar. Violinists leaned into their bows, matching the intensity. The woodwinds tightened their breath control. The percussionists grinned like they were about to set the world on fire. And then, the conductor brought one finger to his lips. A signal. The entire ensemble knew instantly what it meant. Prepare. The marching band reached the center of the station, forming 2 perfect rows. The drumline snapped their sticks up, holding the tension like a drawn bowstring. The brass walked into formation with crisp, professional strides. The conductor inhaled. He raised his baton high. And the entire station exploded. Violins raced into a tremolo sprint, bows shaking like blizzards. Cellos thundered in deep, rolling waves. The choir, children and adults, opened their mouths and unleashed a unified, soaring cry that made the hair on every arm stand up. The marching band's brass tore through the melody with heroic power, while the snares added rapid-fire cracks that sounded like sparks flying from metal. The tubas grounded the sound with a heavy, authoritative rumble. People were shouting over the music, but not in complaint. In awe. In disbelief. In raw emotion. "I can't breathe. This is insane. They rehearsed this? Where? How? We're seeing history." Even airport flash mobs couldn't compete with this. The station wasn't a station anymore. It was a coliseum of sound. The melody climbed higher, 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 approaching the climactic section. And just when the audience thought it couldn't become more overwhelming, the conductor pointed toward the stairs. And something happened that no one expected. Dancers appeared. They shot down the steps in synchronized movements, wearing black and gold costumes that shimmered under the overhead lights. A 20-person troupe, choreographed with perfect precision, weaving between the musicians like they were part of the music itself. Their movements were sharp, rhythmic, pulsing with every drumbeat. Kicks, spins, formations. Grace and power fused together. The station erupted again, louder than the music. A grandmother clapped along, tears in her eyes. Kids jumped up and down, screaming with joy. Couples held each other's hands like they were watching the finale of a Broadway show. And above it all, the conductor kept shaping the chaos into harmony, every flick of his baton turning the 100-plus musicians and dancers into one living, breathing organism. The melody thickened, built on itself, stacking layers of sound until it felt like the ceiling would shatter from the sheer volume. But the musicians were in complete control. Then, without warning, the conductor slashed his baton downward. Boom. A sudden stop. Everything halted again. Silence. But this silence was different from Section 3. This time it was heavy, trembling, filled with anticipation and adrenaline. The dancers froze in dramatic poses. The marching band held their breath. The orchestra stayed poised, bows hovering in the air. The choir's chests were rising, ready to explode. The conductor slowly turned. Facing everyone. Facing the dancers. Facing the marching band. Facing the children. Facing the city of Paris itself. He extended his arms out wide. A signal. A cue. The final one. Every musician inhaled at the same time, like a single giant beast waking from sleep. And as the conductor drew his baton upward, phones lifted. Jaws dropped. Hearts pounded. Because everyone in the station could feel it in their bones. The final crescendo was about to begin. A finale unlike anything Paris had ever heard. The conductor's baton didn't rise. It ignited. And every musician in the building knew. This final moment wasn't just an ending. It was the kind of finale people would talk about for decades. The baton reached its peak, the conductor's coat swaying behind him like a cape. Every musician, string, brass, choir, marching band, dancers, stood frozen, locked in a perfect stillness that felt impossible after such explosive energy. The air itself vibrated with suspense. A child in the front row whispered, "Is it starting again?" The conductor exhaled. And the world erupted. Wham! The drumline struck first, 4 snares hitting a rapid 16th note burst that ignited the entire station. The tenors rolled in like a thunderclap, and the bass drums boomed so deep the glass doors trembled. The strings followed immediately, violins firing into the fastest run of Carol of the Bells yet, bows slicing like lightning. Violas harmonized in lower, darker patterns, while cellos punched the rhythm with fierce, cinematic power. The brass section lifted their bells to the ceiling and blasted a triumphant motif that cut through the hall like a golden spear. Bright, fierce, unstoppable. And then the choir. Oh, the choir. Children and adults together unleashed the full, soaring force of their voices, singing in perfect unison. Not a single note wavered. Their sound filled the station with warmth and brilliance and holiday fire, each syllable glowing like the candles the children still held. People in the audience wept openly. Others screamed in delight. Phones were raised, yet half the viewers forgot to press record because they were too overwhelmed. The dancers burst into motion again, this time with faster, sharper choreography. They weaved through the band members, swirling around the orchestra, kicking and spinning with athletic grace that turned the station into a living, breathing stage. Their costumes shimmered with each turn, sending reflections across the marble floor. The conductor guided it all, knees bent, arms sweeping, baton blazing like a spark. His movements were fierce, unrestrained, as if he were pulling sound from the air itself and molding it into something colossal. And then something miraculous happened. The entire station began clapping in perfect rhythm. Hundreds of hands. Dozens of nationalities. Strangers who had never met, clapping together as if they had rehearsed for months. The musicians felt it. The choir felt it. The dancers felt it. The conductor felt it. The audience had joined the flash mob. The music swelled to a new height. Higher, louder, richer. Like the whole world was singing. Then came the moment no one could ever forget. The conductor made a tiny gesture, barely a flick of his wrist. And everyone, every violinist, every singer, every dancer, every drummer, every brass player, understood. The grand pause. Everything stopped. Not gradually. Not softly. Instantly. Silence swallowed the hall. A woman in the crowd gasped. A suitcase rolled to a stop. A baby stopped crying mid-wail. The conductor held his baton perfectly still. The candles in the children's hands flickered. Then, he spun the baton downward with a dramatic slash. Boom! The finale detonated like fireworks. The brass blew with heroic power. The snare drums rattled like gunfire. The cellos and basses roared in unison. The bells, real handbells now, rang out across the station in shimmering waves. The choir hit the highest notes of the arrangement, voices soaring like an angelic explosion. Everything layered together. Sound on sound. Voice on voice. Energy on energy. Until the station vibrated with the sheer force of the finale. The dancers formed a final V-shaped formation. The marching band lined up behind them. The orchestra filled the center. The choir spread across the sides. The conductor stepped onto a bench, raising himself above the crowd. His baton sliced through the air. Finalchord. A massive, perfect, earth-shaking blast of sound. The final note held. Ringing, ringing, ringing. And then faded like snow falling on a quiet street. Silence again. But this time, it was the silence of all. The conductor slowly lowered his arms. And the station exploded into applause. Cheering. Screaming. Whistling. Crying. People hugged strangers. Children jumped up and down. Tourists shouted in every language. Security guards clapped so hard their radios shook. It wasn't just applause. It was gratitude. It was wonder. It was magic. Musicians smiled at one another. The dancers bowed. The choir kids waved their candles. The marching band saluted. And the conductor, with a soft, humble smile, bowed deeply to the crowd. Someone shouted, "This is the best flash mob in history." Another yelled, "Paris will never be the same." Cameras flashed. People posted clips instantly. Comments began to flood the internet in real time. But inside the station, things slowed. Musicians began packing. Children hugged their families. Dancers caught their breath. The conductor removed his coat and laughed softly, exhausted. And as the crowd slowly dispersed, one final violinist played a quiet, gentle reprise. Just 4 notes. Ding dong, ding dong. The same 4 notes that began it all. Full circle. A perfect ending. Paris would remember this night forever.